I never thought the thing that would break me would happen at a backyard barbecue on a Tuesday afternoon in July. Not a market crash, not a layoff, not some dramatic confrontation in a courtroom or a hospital waiting room. A backyard barbecue, my wife's coworkers, a cooler full of White Claw, and a joke that got more laughs than it deserved. My name is Thomas Hale. I'm 42 years old, and for the last 11 years, I've worked as a structural engineer at Vance & Morley in downtown Charlotte. I'm not the guy you'd notice first at a party. I don't talk loud. I don't tell stories that make the whole room turn around. But I know how to hold things together. Buildings, budgets, a family when the pressure gets bad. That's always been my thing. Quiet competence. Doing what needs to be done without needing applause for it. My wife, Sandra, is different. She lights up rooms. She always has. When I met her at a mutual friend's housewarming in 2009, she was standing in the kitchen, explaining the Fed's monetary policy to a guy who clearly just wanted to flirt with her. And she was doing it with this infectious energy that made even the Fed sound interesting. She was a loan officer at the time, sharp and driven, and I knew within about 20 minutes that I was in serious trouble. We got married in 2011. Our daughter, Nora, was born in 2014. Our son, Eli, came 2 years later. Life got full fast, the good kind of full. Sandra moved into commercial lending, then into bank management. And then about 4 years ago, she was recruited into a VP role at Summit Capital Group. The salary jump was significant. The title was impressive. And somewhere in all of that, something shifted between us that I didn't notice until the damage was already done. It started small. These things always do. The first time I really felt it was at her company holiday party about 2.5 years ago. I was talking to one of her colleagues, a guy named Brett, about a pedestrian bridge project I've been working on. A community project, public funding, something I was genuinely proud of. Sandra drifted over mid-conversation, or the tail end of it, and said, with this little laugh, "Tom designs bridges. Literal bridges. It's adorable." Brett smiled politely. I finished my drink. I told myself it wasn't worth making a thing out of, but it kept happening. At dinner with her boss, she mentioned that I basically count concrete for a living. At a neighborhood block party, when someone asked what I did, she jumped in before I could answer and said, "He keeps things from falling down, hopefully." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. That was the part I hated most about myself later, that I laughed too. The comments at home were different. Those were quieter and somehow worse. When I'd mention a project deadline, she'd say, "How complicated can it really be?" When I stayed late to finish load calculations on a school renovation, she'd say, "It's not like you're saving lives." When Nora asked me once what I did at work, I started explaining how engineers make sure buildings are safe. And Sandra said from across the kitchen, "Daddy makes sure the walls don't fall down, honey. It's important." The pause before "it's important" lasted about half a second too long. I'm not a man who cries easily, but I stood at the kitchen counter that night after the kids were in bed, and I felt something I didn't have a word for. Not anger exactly. More like watching something you've built get quietly taken apart, one bolt at a time, while you're still living in it. I tried to raise it once early on. We were driving back from dropping the kids at my parents' place for a weekend, and I said, "Hey, can I ask you something? The jokes about my job, do you realize how they come across?" She looked at me like I'd said something mildly confusing. "I'm just kidding around, Tom. Everyone knows you're smart." "That's not really the point," I said. "What is the point?" she said. And I couldn't explain it fast enough, couldn't find the words in that moment. And she turned the music up, and that was that. I should have pushed harder. I know that now. Instead, I let it go. And she kept going. The pattern escalated in a way I only recognized in retrospect. First, it was just around her colleagues. Then it started bleeding into our social circle. Our friends, the neighbors, her sister when she visited. Sandra had a version of me she'd built for public consumption, and that version was a punchline with good intentions. Harmless Tom. Sweet but simple Tom. The engineer who builds things while his wife runs the real world. Eli picked it up first. He's 8. Kids absorb everything. I was helping him with a science project one Saturday. We were building a small model bridge out of popsicle sticks and talking about load distribution. And he was actually getting it, asking good questions. Then he looked up and said, "Mom says you're good at this stuff, but it's not really that important." He said it the way kids say things. No filter, no awareness, just repeating what he'd heard. I kept my voice even. I told him that every building he'd ever been in, every bridge he'd ever crossed, Every school where every kid learned anything. All of it got built because engineers made sure it wouldn't fall down. He nodded slowly, thinking about it. I went back to the model, but I stared at those popsicle sticks for a long time after he left the room. I didn't say anything to Sandra that night, or the night after. I was calculating, the way engineers do, measuring load, measuring yield points, trying to figure out exactly how much more the structure could take before I had to do something about it. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in late July. Sandra's company was hosting an informal summer get-together at the home of one of her senior colleagues. A sprawling house in Weddington with a pool and a catered spread and enough citronella candles to supply a summer camp. I didn't want to go. I'd had a rough week. We'd discovered a critical miscalculation on a hospital project. I had to work through the night Wednesday to fix it before the contractor poured the foundation, and I was running on maybe 6 hours of sleep total. But Sandra said it mattered. Said it would be strange if I didn't come. Said it would only be a couple hours. So I went. For the first hour, it was fine. I talked to a few people. I ate well. I stood by the pool with the beer and watched Weddington do its thing and tried to just be present. Then Sandra's manager, a woman named Georgia, started talking about weekend projects, renovations she was doing on her house, contractors giving her trouble, the usual homeowner complaints. I mentioned that I'd recently repaired our deck myself and could recommend some good techniques for waterproofing. Before I could get 3 sentences in, Sandra said, "Tom always thinks he can fix everything because he studied structures. You should see him staring at buildings when we travel. It's like taking a vacation with a very earnest safety inspector." The group laughed. Georgia smiled. Someone made a comment about engineers and their brains. Sandra was warm and funny and completely in her element. I excused myself to get another drink I didn't want. I stood in that kitchen for a few minutes, looking at the granite countertop, thinking about the tension calculations I'd run on that hospital project 2 nights ago, and how if I'd gotten them wrong, how many people might have been affected. I thought about the pedestrian bridge I'd designed 2 years back that the city dedicated last spring. I thought about Eli with his popsicle sticks asking careful questions. And I thought about the fact that my wife had just turned me into a bit at her work party for the 4th or 5th time in 18 months. When I walked back outside, Sandra was mid-story. "The funniest thing," she was saying, "is that Tom spent an entire dinner once explaining to our 9-year-old why a particular roof design was inefficient. Like Buddy, she wants to talk about her friends, not cantilevers." More laughter. Georgia was wiping her eye. Someone said, "That's so Tom. That's so Tom." I didn't explode. I didn't make a scene. I just stood at the edge of the group and waited for the story to finish. And then I said, "I'm going to head out. Long week." Sandra's eyebrows went up. "Already? We just got here." "You've been here an hour and a half," I said. "I'll get an Uber. You stay." And I walked out through the side gate before anyone could say anything else. In the car home, I didn't feel righteous or vindicated. I felt tired. Bone tired. The kind of tired that isn't about sleep. That night, after the kids were in bed and Sandra got home and found me reading in the living room, she stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and said, "That was embarrassing, Tom." And something in me just stopped. "Which part?" I asked. "You leaving like that, without saying goodbye to anyone? You mean the same way you've been leaving me out to dry in front of your colleagues for the past year and a half?" She blinked. "I was joking around. Everyone loved it." "Georgia loved it," I said. "I didn't. You're so sensitive." And there it was, the word that ends conversations. The little door slammed dressed up as an observation. "I'm going to say this once clearly," I said. And I kept my voice very level, the way I do when I'm in a room with contractors who are trying to bully me off a spec. "I am not sensitive. I am a person. You've been publicly mocking for a year and a half, and I'm asking you to stop." "Mocking? Tom, I'm not. You told your entire team that I basically count concrete. You described me as a safety inspector at a party. You interrupted our son to tell him my career isn't important." I paused. "Do you want me to keep going?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I didn't think it bothered you." "I told you it bothered me. In the car. 8 months ago." More silence. Then she said, "I'll be more careful," and went upstairs. I sat there for a long time. I wasn't satisfied. More careful wasn't an apology. It was a course correction, the minimum required to make the conversation stop. I knew the difference. And I knew that nothing had really changed, so I made a decision. I didn't move out. I didn't call a lawyer. What I did was quieter and, I think, more honest. I stopped performing. I stopped filling silence at her work events. I stopped laughing along when she made the jokes. I stopped being the cheerful, easygoing version of Tom that had made it so easy for her to use me as the lovable punchline when she tried to do it at a dinner with her sister 2 weeks later. Tom once spent 45 minutes explaining to our kids why a parking garage in Uptown was poorly designed. I didn't laugh. I just looked at her and said, "I remember that." Nora thought it was interesting. Not aggressive, just factual. The joke didn't land. Her sister changed the subject. Sandra noticed. She didn't say anything right away, but she noticed. The real shift came about 3 weeks after the Weddington party. I'd been nominated, and this had happened quietly, without any fanfare on my part, for the Carolina Engineering Excellence Award. It's not a small thing. Our firm had been trying to get a project nominated for 6 years. The project was a middle school renovation in Gaston County, a community that couldn't afford to shut the building down for a full reconstruction. So we'd found a way to reinforce the entire structure incrementally while the kids were still attending. Complicated, precise, months of planning, the kind of work that doesn't make headlines but matters enormously to real people. My project manager sent me the nomination email on a Wednesday morning. I read it twice and then went back to work. I didn't tell Sandra, not out of spite, exactly. More because I'd spent so long having my work diminished that I wanted to hold this one close, just for a little while. See how it felt to keep something that was mine, actually mine. The awards event was in September. When the day came, I told Sandra I had a firm event, dressed in the suit I wear for site walkthroughs, and went alone. We won. I stood at the podium and talked about the Gaston County School. I talked about the Keystone County School. I talked about the kids who'd been in those classrooms while we worked around them. I talked about what it means to build something that holds, not just the walls, but the community inside them. A few people cried. The applause was genuine and long. I drove home alone and sat in the parking lot outside our house for about 15 minutes. When I came inside, Sandra was on the couch watching television. She looked up and said, "How was the thing?" "Good," I said. "Productive." I put the award in my office. I didn't make a point of showing it to her. What I didn't know is that Nora had seen the nomination email. She'd been using my laptop to look something up and had accidentally opened it. She was 12, curious, and, it turned out, paying a lot more attention than I'd realized. She told Sandra, "I don't know exactly what Nora said or how the conversation went. I wasn't there. What I know is that on a Friday night, about 2 weeks after the ceremony, Sandra came into my office while I was working late and stood in front of my desk looking at the award on the shelf. It was a simple thing, a glass piece with the project name engraved. The firm's name, the year, nothing flashy. She stood there for a long moment. "You won this and didn't tell me," she said. "I didn't think it was important enough to mention," I said. "Isn't that what you always say? It's not really that important?" I didn't say it harshly, just evenly. But she flinched. She sat down in the chair across from my desk, the one where clients sit when they come by the house, where Eli sits when he wants to talk. And she was quiet for long enough that I looked up from what I was doing. "I've been doing the same thing my mother did to my father," she said. "That was not what I expected." "She used to do it constantly," Sandra continued. "Make him the butt of every joke. She called it ribbing. He called it nothing, because he never said anything. I watched him go quiet over about 15 years. I watched him stop talking about his work, stop getting excited about things, stop bringing ideas to the dinner table. And I always thought she was just funny, just being sharp, she stopped, pressed her lips together. I became her. I didn't say anything. I didn't think she was done. "Nora told me about the award," she said. "She told me she'd seen the email and she wanted to know if I knew, and she had this look on her face, like she wasn't sure whether I'd be excited for you or whether I'd make a joke about it." Sandra's voice went tight. Our 12-year-old wasn't sure if I'd be proud of her father. That one landed. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her Daddy was extraordinary, that what he does matters enormously, and that I hadn't been doing a good enough job of saying that." She paused, and now I sat in the bathroom for about 20 minutes feeling terrible. "Good," I said. It wasn't a kind thing to say, but it was honest, and she didn't argue with it. What followed wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. There was no single conversation that fixed everything. What happened was more like what happens when you reinforce a compromise structure. You work methodically, you shore up one connection point at a time, and over weeks the whole thing gradually stops leaning. Sandra started small. She stopped making the jokes cold turkey, which I don't think was as easy for her as it might sound. The habit was deep. Sometimes she'd start something and catch herself mid-sentence. Once at her office Christmas party, she began a sentence with, "Tom always," and then visibly redirected. "Tom has been working on a really complicated renovation project, and I keep learning things about it I never expected to find interesting." Her colleague turned to me and asked about it. I talked for about 5 minutes. Sandra listened like she was actually hearing it for the first time. I don't think she was performing. I think she actually was hearing it for the first time. I made adjustments too. I got better at saying what I was feeling before it built to a pressure I couldn't manage. I started sharing more about my work at home, the small victories, the interesting problems, not just the outcomes. Illy got very into structural engineering for about 3 months and kept asking me questions I genuinely loved answering. Nora started pointing out buildings to me when we drove around and asking whether they were designed well. That part I hadn't expected, and it meant more than I know how to say. 6 months after the Weddington party, we were at a fundraising dinner for Nora's school. Sandra was talking to another parent, a woman she'd met before, someone in finance, and the woman asked how we'd met, what we both did. Sandra said, "Tom is a structural engineer. He just won a major award for a school renovation project in Gaston County. I brag about it now, so he doesn't have to." I was standing right there. I heard the whole thing. I didn't make a big deal of it. I just caught her eye and she caught mine, and there was something in that look that was worth more than any award on any shelf. We're not a perfect couple. I don't think we'll ever be the kind of people who don't need work. But I learned something that year that I think about whenever a project is giving me trouble. The most dangerous damage isn't the dramatic failure. It's the slow erosion, the thing that looks fine from the outside while the connections quietly loosen underneath. You can fix slow erosion, but you have to be willing to see it first. I'm glad I finally saw it. I'm glad Sandra did too. I'm glad our daughter was paying attention. I've spent my career calculating how much stress a structure can absorb before something gives. Beams, columns, connections. Everything has a yield point. You can push past it once, and sometimes the thing still holds, but keep pushing, and one day you come back, and the whole frame has shifted without anyone noticing. That's what was happening to me. That's what I didn't see for far too long. Looking back at everything with Sandra, the jokes at the holiday party, the dinner with her boss, the Weddington barbecue, I can trace the line clearly now. Not a single moment broke me. It was the accumulation, the slow, quiet erosion of being treated like a punchline by the one person who was supposed to know better than anyone what I was made of. And the honest part, the part I have to own, is that I let it go on because confrontation felt costly and silence felt easier. That's not wisdom. That's avoidance. And avoidance has a price you always end up paying eventually, one way or another. What I've come to understand is that respect isn't something you get handed in a marriage. It's something that gets built and maintained, the same way anything worth keeping gets built and maintained. And when you stop tending to it, when one person starts chipping away at it and the other person stops saying anything, it deteriorates, slowly and visibly, until your 8-year-old son is telling you your work isn't important, because he's just repeating what he absorbed at home. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Not for my own pride. For what Eli and Nora were learning about how people treat each other. There's a version of this story where I blow up at that barbecue and make everything worse. There's another version where I say nothing, again, and keep shrinking. I chose neither. I chose to be still, and deliberate and clear, to say what was true without cruelty, to stop performing easygoing when I wasn't feeling it, to hold the line without burning the house down. That took more restraint than any confrontation would have. It also worked in a way that anger never could have. And Sandra, I want to be honest about her too. She recognized herself in something she didn't want to be. That recognition came from Nora, our 12-year-old, who saw the award email and wondered whether her mother would be proud of her father or make a joke about it. That question, from our daughter, was what finally cut through. You can ignore a spouse. You cannot ignore your child seeing you clearly and finding you wanting. What I know now is this. The people who diminish you quietly are often not doing it from cruelty. They're doing it from habit, from something they absorbed somewhere along the way, from the comfort of a dynamic that works for them until someone makes it stop working. And the only person who can make it stop is you. Not with an ultimatum, not with an explosion, with a steady, unhurried refusal to keep participating in your own diminishment. I'm glad I won that award. I'm gladder that my daughter pointed to a building on the drive home last week and asked me whether the load-bearing walls were in the right place. I didn't have a perfect answer. We figured it out together. That's enough. That's more than enough.